The senior senator from Rhode Island.
Madam President, I ask that the quorum call be dispensed with.
Without objection.
Thank you, Madam President. I ask unanimous consent to yield back all remaining time on the motion to proceed to calendar number 144, HR 4350, the National Defense Authorization Act. That if the motion to proceed is agreed to, the Reed-Inhofe substitute amendment number 3867, as modified with the changes at the desk, be called up and reported by number. Further, that it be in order to call up the following amendments to the Reed-Inhofe substitute amendment 3867 as modified in the order listed. 1, Reed, number 4775. 2, Hoven, number 4482. 3, Sanders, number 4654. 4, Lee, number 4793. 5, Paul, number 4395. 6, Hawley, number 4140. 7, Peters Portman, number 4799. 8, Scott of Florida, number 4813, substitute to number 4799. Side by side, excuse me. Those would be number 8, Scott, 4813, side by side to 4799. 9, Durbin Lee, number 3939. 10, Cardin, number 3980. 11, Lujan Crapo, number 4260. 12, King Sass, number 4784. 13, Cruz, number 4656. 14, Kane, number 4133. 15, Hassan, number 4255. 16, Menendez, number 4786. 17, Marshall, number 4093. 18, Kennedy, number 4660. 19, Sanders, number 4722. 20, Portman, number 4540. That, with the exception of the Reed Amendment, number 4775, the Senate vote at 9:30 p.m. today in relation to any first-degree amendment offered in the order listed above, with 60 affirmative votes required for adoption of amendments in this agreement and 2 minutes of debate equally divided in the usual form prior to each vote.
Is there objection? The senior senator from Florida.
Reserving the right to object. What's missing from this list is our Uyghur Forced Labor Prevention Act. In a moment, you're going to hear that it has this procedural problem, blue slip. Anyone who's not familiar with the lingo around here, that means it's going to generate revenue and therefore has to originate in the House. That's what you're going to hear in a moment. Here's what's so interesting about it. About, 4, 5, 6 weeks ago, that very bill passed by unanimous consent in this very Senate. This bill doesn't have a blue slip problem. It has a bunch of corporations who are making stuff in Xinjiang province problem. Okay? That's what the problem here. And so everyone's aware, everyone here is aware, I hope, in the Xinjiang province of China, Uyghur Muslims are put into forced labor camps where they work as slaves, something that this administration and the previous termed as genocide. They work as slaves making products. And there are American companies that are sourcing goods that end up in the shelves in this country. It is, in fact, almost certain that in this very chamber there is some product that was manufactured by slave labor in China. We passed that bill in the Senate by unanimous consent. Not a single person objected to it. There was no blue slip problem then. Now, all of a sudden, there is. This is because there's a bunch of, that's how they're killing it in the House. A bunch of these corporations lobbying against it, doing everything possible, and they know if it gets in this bill, it's going to become law. So I object, and I ask that the request be modified to include my amendment 4330.
Is there objection to the modification?
I object to the modification, Madam Chairman.
Objection is heard to the modification.
Madam
Is
President,
there objection to the original request?
I object.
Madam
Objection
President,
is heard.
I renew my request.
Is there objection? The junior senator from Montana.
Reserving the right to object. Madam President, border security is national security. And that's why I rise today to speak on my amendment number 4236, to block President Biden's outrageous taxpayer-funded handouts to illegal immigrants who broke the law and entered our country illegally. At a time when American families are struggling because of Bidenflation, when families are paying more for everything from gas to groceries to heating their homes, the president wants to give up to hundreds of millions of your taxpayer dollars to illegal immigrants as a reward for breaking the law. Don't forget, we still have a crisis on our southern border, and we should be doing all that we can to secure our southern border, not incentivize illegal immigration. These taxpayer-funded handouts to illegal immigrants are outrageous, and I would urge my colleagues to allow a vote on my common sense amendment. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent to modify the request to include my amendment number 4236.
Madam
Is there
President,
objection to the modification?
I object to the modification.
Objection is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, I renew my request.
Is there objection? The junior senator from Pennsylvania.
Madam President, reserving the right to object, I'd just like to bring to my colleagues' attention the front page of the Wall Street Journal, the lead story, the headline above the fold today: annual drug overdose deaths top 100,000, setting a record. For the 12 months ending in April, all-time record number of fatalities, big majority of them opioids, mostly synthetic opioids, driven primarily by fentanyl. It's unbelievable. Think of 100,000 new families in the last 12 months that'll have an empty seat at the Thanksgiving Day dinner next Thursday. Pennsylvania's been hit as hard as any state, but every one of our states has been hit hard by this. So why am I objecting to this? Because I've got an amendment that, at least on the margins, would help. It's simple and it's common sense. It adds fentanyl to the majors list. The majors list is the list that includes the countries that the president has to identify as the largest producers of illicit fentanyl. That's China, let's be clear. But once these countries, any country, is identified as a big producer of fentanyl, my bill would require those countries to prosecute drug traffickers and schedule fentanyl as a class. And if they do not, then they're not doing all they could and should be doing to keep fentanyl off our streets. In which case, under my amendment, the president would be authorized to withhold certain categories of foreign aid. This bill is so non-controversial and common sense, it's actually already passed this body just last year. It's bipartisan. Senator Maggie Hassan from New Hampshire, Democrat, is my partner on the underlying bill. And I would point out to my colleagues, I don't have any objection to anyone getting an amendment vote. I'm not holding up anybody's votes as long as we get this chance to reduce the flow of fentanyl coming into America. So I ask to modify the request to include my amendment number 3925.
Is there objection to the modification?
Madam President, I object to the modification.
There is objection. Is there objection to the original request?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, I renew my request.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
The junior senator from Idaho.
Madam President, reserving the right to object, I want to speak today on behalf of my amendment, Res. 4794, which is not included on that list, which I've introduced with co-sponsors Senators Portman, Cruz, Barrasso, Johnson, Cotton, Daines, and Wicker. This amendment is the Senate companion to bipartisan language that already is included in the House-passed NDAA, which would sanction Nord Stream 2, Putin's premier energy weapon against the Ukraine and Europe. The timing could not be more important. Ukraine stands on the brink of an invasion, and Europe is in the throes of an energy crisis created by Russia. There's a reason Ukraine's President Zelensky tweeted an urgent request last week regarding this amendment, which said, quote, all friends of Ukraine and Europe and the U.S. Senate should back this amendment. We're now seeing the consequences of the administration's decision to waive mandatory PISA sanctions and refusal to impose CAATSA sanctions. Russia has deliberately cut gas transmission to Europe through the Ukraine and is using high energy prices to pressure the EU into approving Nord Stream 2 as quickly as possible. Putin has publicly stated as such. Meanwhile, Russian forces have built up along the border with Ukraine in preparation for what could be a full-scale invasion, just as they did to the Crimea. Remember, Nord Stream 2 is designed to replace Ukraine's gas transit system, meaning Russia no longer has to worry about destroying its own infrastructure in the event of a full-scale war. We cannot allow Putin's blackmail to succeed. Nord Stream 2 has always been a bipartisan issue here in the Senate, and it should continue to be. Not a single member of Congress supports the completion of this pipeline. I'd like to think a similar number of us don't feel we should ignore our friends in Europe, particularly Central and Eastern Europe, who stand to lose the most from Nord Stream 2. Our amendment would impose mandatory sanctions against Nord Stream 2 AG, the company responsible for the project, as well as the companies involved in testing and certifying the pipeline before it can become operational. We do provide the administration with a pathway to lifting these targeted sanctions, pending, of course, congressional review. This pathway is the exact same process for congressional input that 98 senators voted for in CAATSA just a few years ago. Nord Stream 2 is not set to become operational for months, so there's still time to stop it, but we need to act quickly. I urge my colleagues to join our distinguished colleagues in the House of Representatives on this important endeavor and to vote yes on this amendment. Therefore, I ask unanimous consent to modify the request of the distinguished Senator Reid and include my amendment, number 4794.
Is there objection to the modification?
Madam President, I object to the modification.
Objection to the modification is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, I renew my original request.
Is there objection?
Madam President,
The junior senator from Texas.
reserving the right to object. 2 years ago, I authored bipartisan legislation sanctioning any company that participated in building Nord Stream 2. That legislation passed Congress overwhelmingly, and Democrats and Republicans overwhelmingly supported it. That was passed on the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act. A year ago, I authored a second set of bipartisan sanctions on Nord Stream 2. That second set of bipartisan sanctions, again, passed overwhelmingly with the support of Democrats and Republicans in this chamber. That second set of bipartisan sanctions likewise passed on the National Defense Authorization Act. Today, the Democrats are objecting to passing sanctions on Nord Stream 2. What has changed? Two things have changed, Madam President. Number one, today Joe Biden is president and not Donald Trump. And the Democrats were more than willing to stand up to Russia when Donald Trump was president. But when Joe Biden is president, suddenly it is untenable for Democrats to stand up to Russia. But secondly, it's even worse, because what has also changed is that Joe Biden has utterly and completely capitulated to Vladimir Putin. He has waived the mandatory sanctions that this body passed. He has given a multi-billion-dollar generational gift to Putin. This strengthens Russia. Decades from now, successor dictators in Russia will reap billions of dollars they will use for military aggression against Europe, against America, and it will be because Joe Biden utterly and completely capitulated. So why, Madam President, are Senate Democrats objecting to a vote on Nord Stream 2? Because they cannot defend Joe Biden's surrender to Putin on the merits. They don't want to vote on it because it would be politically inconvenient for this White House that has undermined the national security of the United States and has weakened our allies. Right now, energy prices are skyrocketing in Europe because Joe Biden surrendered to Vladimir Putin. We have twice passed Nord Stream 2 sanctions on the NDAA. After Biden's surrender to Putin, we should do so again And my Democratic friends who've given speech after speech after speech against Nord Stream 2, against Russia, should demonstrate they mean what they say and they're not simply interested in being political protectors for a Democratic president. Accordingly, Madam President, and I would note, by the way, in response to every amendment that has been called up, the Democrats have not seen fit to provide even a word of substantive argument in response. So I'm going to predict you're not going to hear a defense of Joe Biden's surrender to Russia. You're not going to hear any defense of Nord Stream 2. You haven't heard any substantive defense. You're going to hear two words, I object, because the Democrats are afraid of taking this vote. I believe we are elected here to represent our constituents and the interest of the United States, and we should have the courage to do so. Therefore, I ask to modify the request to include Amendment 4794.
Is there objection to the modification?
Madam President, I object.
Objection to the modification is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
My prediction was accurate, and I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, I renew my original request.
Is there objection?
Madam President.
The junior senator from Alaska.
Madam President, reserving the right to object, I am requesting a vote on my amendment, number 4329, and I am very disappointed that my Democratic colleagues will refuse to vote on this very simple, very important, very constitutionally correct amendment that also dramatically could impact military readiness, which is why it's so important to discuss here as we're debating the NDAA. Madam President, my amendment is simple. It prohibits the Department of Defense from enforcing President Biden's vaccine mandate on contractors and subcontractors. That's it. Why is this important? Well, look, we all want to put the vaccine behind us. There's no doubt about that. We've all been vaccinated here. I think most of us have encouraged our constituents in consultation with their physicians to do the same. But first and foremost, Madam President, this vaccine mandate is becoming increasingly clear is not constitutionally based and is not based in statute. And I think that the American people are seeing that on a daily basis. So it's an issue of not just the constitutional authority of the president, but it's an issue of the principle that got us all through the pandemic last year. If you remember, one of the most important principles that we had as we were working on COVID relief, whether the CARES Act or other aspects of legislation that we had with regard to COVID relief for our citizens, was this. If you got relief, whether you were a small business from the PPP program or an airline or a defense contractor, the law said you had to keep your employees. You had to keep them together, employers and employees together. That was the principle that all of us, Democrats and Republicans, the Trump administration agreed on during the pandemic. And it worked. And many of these workers were on the front lines helping us get through the pandemic. This president, with his mandate, has taken a sledgehammer to that principle. Not only are we now saying employers and employees stick together, he's saying to employers, if you don't listen to the president, employers in America, you have to fire your employees. Think about that, Madam President. That is exactly the opposite of what we all agreed on last year as we were trying to get this nation through the pandemic. So it's fairness, it's a principle that matters, and here's the final thing. And I think we're going to see this. It's a readiness issue for our military. I've been talking to the White House on trying to get them to rescind this mandate. They have consistently said, well, it's only going to impact about 1% of the workforce. We can't afford anybody getting fired from their job, but they think it's about 1%. I was home in Alaska last weekend. This could impact contractors 10, 15, 20% of their workforce. Might not be working. Defense contractors, hurting readiness. And again, during the pandemic, we were asking these Americans to show up at work and make sure our defense industries were strong. And now the president's telling these same contractors, go fire your employees. Oh, by the way, over the holidays. So I think this is a very simple, reasonable amendment that will help readiness. And therefore, Madam President, I ask to modify the request to include my amendment number 4329.
Is there objection to the modification?
Madam President, I object to the modification.
Objection to the modification is heard.
Just noticed it.
Is there objection to the original request?
Madam President, I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, I renew the original request.
Is there objection?
Madam President, I object.
The junior senator from Oklahoma.
Reserving the right to object. It is an astounding thing. This is a conversation that's happened today about amendments to the National Defense Authorization. Now, I haven't been here very long, but typically an NDAA takes about 2 weeks on the floor to be able to process. And there's a lot of conversation about different amendments. There's managers' packages. There's big groupings of packages that come together where they're non-controversial. Then there'll be a series of votes that are side by side and other votes. It's already been set up for 20 votes. That's terrific. That's a great start. And then there's a request for some other things that are pretty typical, actually. There have been requests just in the last couple of minutes on military contractors and the vaccine mandate that will certainly affect our military readiness. That's certainly defense-related. Human trafficking in China and whether products are coming through. It's pretty straightforward. In fact, that's passed unanimously through this body. That doesn't seem that controversial to be able to be in here. Conversations about fentanyl and the origin of fentanyl, where that's coming from, that shouldn't be controversial to try to protect the country, but suddenly that amendment's been blocked. Nord Stream 2, Ukraine and Russia has not been a controversial issue for us. This body has laid down sanctions multiple times on NDAA on this exact issue, and now it's being blocked. You can't even debate it. And myself and Senator Daines both brought up things tonight dealing with border security, which is certainly national security. 1.7 million people that we know of have illegally crossed our southwest border this year. It's the highest number of illegal crossings in the history of our country, 1.7 million. But on January the 20th of this year, President Biden stopped construction on the border wall. In many places, literally, where they only had to hang the gates and install the electronic infrastructure there. That was all that was left, but it stopped. Why is this connected to national security? Well, certainly border security is national security. Also part of this funding did come out of defense funding. It's being done by the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in many places. And on top of that, this year, so far, just so far this year, we have paid contractors $2 billion not to build the wall. These were contracts that had already been let out to do the construction. We are continuing to pay about $3 million a day to contractors not to complete the wall in sections, by the way, in sections that career individuals had selected that section and that design and then had to prove it, that that was the right place and the right design to both Republican and Democrats in this body, which they did. Now we're wasting $2 billion to not do national security. My amendment's very straightforward. We take the contracts that are already out there and we complete those sections of the wall that have been approved by career individuals to complete those sections and not just throw the money away and waste $2 billion of American taxpayer dollars, but to actually use it for national security. So saying that, I ask that the request be modified to include my amendment 4100.
Is there objection to the modification?
Madam President, I object to the modification.
Objection to the modification is heard. Is there objection to the original request?
I object.
Objection is heard.
Madam President, I renew my original.
Is there objection? Objection is heard.
Madam President, I believe I have the floor.
The senator has the floor.
Madam President, we began this process for the National Defense Authorization Act months ago. In July, working closely with the ranking member and all my colleagues on the committee, we passed a bipartisan National Defense Act, which was focused on the fundamental rationale for our National Defense Act. The men and women of the armed forces, the equipment that they need, the new technology which is absolutely necessary as we go forward, the family lives of these men and women, their development along with the weapons that they will use. This has been the focal point, and as a result, we produced a committee report with a bipartisan majority of 23-3. We've continued this bipartisan approach as we came into the floor debate. We have already included in the substitute amendment which will be offered approximately 60 amendments on a bipartisan basis that cover a range of topics, which have been agreed to by both sides. Again, everything we've done to this point has been on a bipartisan basis. Indeed, this unanimous consent that I have proposed is bipartisan. It incorporates amendments from both my Republican colleagues and my Democratic colleagues. It does so, as we must, in a way that accommodates as many as we can, but we cannot and have never been able to guarantee that every amendment offered could incorporate it into the bill. So what we have here is in a way, a crossroads. We have tried since the very inception to produce a bipartisan bill and a bipartisan floor action and a bipartisan final vote on the National Defense Act of the United States Senate. We have to get there because, again, I can hear my colleagues talk about Nord Stream. That's a very interesting and a very important issue. I can hear them talk about border security. I can hear them talk about forced labor in China. I can hear them talk about illegal immigrants. But ultimately, this is about the men and women who wear the uniform of the United States. And we can't leave them behind. And the proposals tonight may be meritorious, but we have to move forward and give those men and women the tools they need to defend the nation. And again, I can't emphasize enough how working together with my colleague, the ranking member, we have tried at every juncture to be inclusive, to be bipartisan, to recognize as many of the issues as we could. And we have to do that in the context, frankly, of the fact that in the Senate, as has been demonstrated tonight, one person can stand up and say, no, I didn't get what I want, and no one's going to get anything. I think we've done a very good job, frankly, and I might not be objective, in producing a National Defense Act that is, at this juncture, and with these additional amendments, would be more than worthy for final consideration by the Senate. But what is, again, somewhat disconcerting to me is that by analogy, you can talk everything is national defense. But the people who ultimately suffer, if we cannot get to a passage and then deliberations with the House and then a final bill sent to the White House is not only will these problems that we've tried to address be unaddressed, we will send a very powerful message to the men and women in the armed forces is, we don't have your back. We're too busy squabbling amongst ourselves about issues of the border, of Nord Stream, and of other issues. So I would hope that we could move forward. And the regret is that at this juncture, we are abandoning approximately 20 amendments on a bipartisan basis that would have addressed many of the concerns of my colleagues in the Senate. Some are directly related to national defense, and some are not. But they were agreed to by both sides, and they would be added to this legislation. But at this juncture, our responsibility is, and cannot be avoided, of moving forward, of passing our defense bill, and then working with the House to send up to the President of the United States a bill worthy of the sacrifice and service of those who wear the uniform of the United States. And with that, I would yield to the ranking member.
First, well, let me thank my partner there for all the hard work that we've done together. Not many people understand the process that we go through every year. It's an exhaustive process to get just where we are today. First of all, I'd say of all those amendments that were discussed, I support all of them. We didn't get a chance to really see who did and who didn't support them, but I support them all. But when we start one of these processes up each year, and we do this every year, first thing we do is we send a notice out. We send a notice out to each member and ask each member, what types of things are you interested in? And we send this out to 1,000 members, to everyone, each member of the House and the Senate. And they send their notices in as to what they want, when they want it, how they want it. Then we put them and marry them in with other Democrats and Republicans who want the same thing, try to get these lists shaved down a little bit, and we've been successful in doing it. We end up with, right now, there are 60 clear amendments. That's 60. That's about the same number that we had last year and the same number we had the year before. I was disappointed that we didn't get, that we had to waste a lot of time. My fellow senator from Oklahoma, James Langford, made the comment that we should have been on this bill for 2 weeks or longer. And I agree, we should have. We couldn't do it. We didn't have, and I have to say that the leader, the Democrat leader, didn't allow this to come up where we could do this. We didn't have a choice. As Republicans, we didn't have a choice, and we were united in wanting to get started earlier. Now, as a result of that, a lot of Democrats and Republicans have lost their opportunity to get heard and to have amendments considered. So the system is good. It's one that has worked for a long time, and this is going to work. We stop and think about the number of hours that are spent wading through all of these amendments. This does take place, and I would compliment our chairman of the committee that we have worked very well together. We've gotten to this point. We'll have to get this thing finished, and we will. But nonetheless, we've an exhaustive policy that we've considered